2nd today. This is Saturday evening. It's time for the KMFO Forum. Tonight we're going to talk about oil, but before we do that, oil being a big subject and in the news about every day, before we do that, we're going to go over the local news or the national news that's happened this week. The first story that I see on here, and May, it has something to do with you because you predicted, a month and a half ago that Mengele really wasn't Mengele, or the bones in Brazil weren't Mengele. My question is, before we start, they should have known he was in Brazil all the time because Hollywood said...
The boys from Brazil.
The boys from Brazil. That is in Paraguay, and that is in Argentina. But anyway, it says West German experts examining remains of a body ruled to be that of Nazi war criminal Joseph Mengele do not expect their investigation to be concluded before early September. Hans-Ebert Klein, the Frankfurt public prosecutor, told reporters Tuesday forensic experts are relatively certain the body is that of the concentration camp doctor. Now, there's a report just more recently.
Last night on the evening news, one of the channels said that it is not Joseph Mengele. And last week, the chief investigator from Brazil went to Germany with a couple of fingers and some bones and a couple of teeth and a few hairs, and said that the examination in Brazil was a preliminary investigation. It certainly seems the way the media showed that skull at the table and the acclamations of the great investigators and Simon Wiesenthal Center that he's 99% sure, and there absolutely was a piece of evidence that he was dead. Now, the evening news said they didn't think he was. I have to catch that. Someone heard it and called me, but I didn't get 11 o'clock last night. But the German investigator said it was the Houston Post this week. They wouldn't know until September that was Mengele.
Tom, there's a situation right now down in Florida where they just left off a two-star Air Force general off the hook. Had to do with quite a bit of money, like $450 million that he kept in a Swiss bank account, and he kept the interest, and the interest must have been only for a few days on that kind of money. I think I didn't see $19,000, I think was the interest. Boy, if $450 million would make $19,000 in a few minutes.
Also, the case was thrown out because he's linked to the Guggenheim Bank, and Tom can comment on that. And he was an aide to Alexander Haig, which is terribly important with the power that Haig has. In 1978, which is 3 years before Reagan was shot, and Haig said, "I'm in charge." And here the United States government has secret accounts. This is only one we know of because it was a woman that he was living with that spilled the story through various cherchez l'enfant. It was a matter of that, not how much the American government has in Swiss bank accounts. $450 million is like Nazi Germany putting money into secret accounts for who and for what.
Tom, what do you think about that?
Well, this general is just another one of their button men, so to speak, who's assigned to do a little job, and he's the one that takes the heat if he's found out about, and then they usually let him off with a slap on the wrist. So this happens all the time.
Well, they didn't even slap him on the wrist. He was exonerated from this particular thing.
Well, I don't think it happens all the time that they get off if they're caught, but I think the issue here is how many bank accounts of $450 million and more the United States keeps in Swiss accounts.
And then what the question comes down, do we have the advice and consent of Congress? In other words, if we have this kind of money to play games with the Contras down in Nicaragua or play our little war games elsewhere, Congress has no oversight, do they?
Well, they could, but they don't ask for it because there are many of them there are actual operatives of the powers that be, and the rest of them don't know what's going on, so about all they can do is consent. As far as advise, no, we don't get any.
No.
Well, the CIA, now we're talking about CIA operations, and we're talking about how they could be possibly funded. The Guggenheim...
We're not talking about 10 or 20,000 or 2 million or 3 million
No,
now.
we're talking a bundle, a real bundle.
A real bundle.
Yeah. The next thing is that this money, evidently, with other stories that come up to Guggenheim's bank, for example, Green Berets are going to assist in Latin America to clean up the drug trade and the drug wars. Now,
I think that's very funny.
That's like, isn't that
came out last week. The Green Berets were sending home narcotics in the bellies of dead people of Vietnam, and the Southeast Asia was the war there to bring drugs into this country.
As a matter of fact, they sent the bodies to one mortuary in Santa Cruz, so it really comes close to home.
So the Oregonian had an article this week. It was a wire service story. Green Berets help Latin countries with drug wars.
I see. In other words, it's sort of like sending the fox to guard the chicken coop.
Yeah.
It's another one of the Reagan administration lies. It happened under Nixon. They say they're going to have a war on drugs. And this is just to cover up and make everybody think that this is happening when it's not happening at all. All they're doing is arranging for their drug people to come in.
What I say is they are having a war on drugs. They're finding other dealers who they don't want to split the action with. They turn in other people that are interfering with their profits.
Yeah, this is outlined that the actual people who make the profits seem sometimes to change with each administration.
Don't you have the Great Heroin Coup? One of the books that you sell?
Yeah, that's one of the El Primo books that if people are interested in the background of the drug wars to read this, The Great Heroin Coup by Henrik Kruger. And it's
one
available.
Of the best.
And it's cheap, $5.50.
Okay.
Well, let's get back to something else now. We've hit the drug rackets pretty well and special funds for this and that. Now, let's take the funds that we spent and the story about the Navy tossing over valuable equipment overboard rather than have to take inventory. Now, I've felt like doing that a great many times, especially when somebody wanted to inventory paper clips, but this gets to be...
when they say $1 million, then you know it has to be more. And then the Kitty Hawk left. It sailed for the Indian Ocean now without examining or reprimanding anybody. They've sailed off.
Well, to them it is cheap. You remember the famous photos and clips after the end of the Vietnam War in spring of 1975, where they're dumping the helicopters over. That's graphic. People.
Yeah, but this is 1985, and our welfare is being cut, the medical benefits, the money for research on cancer. So if we're tight for money, let's say, why are we dumping it over now?
Well, if you're an aerospace corporation, you can't make any money off it.
Well, back in the Second World War, so, after the war was over, they sold all this war surplus stuff, and some of it could never come back as war surplus. For example, electron tubes made by a certain company of which Mr. David Sarnoff was president had a deal where this stuff couldn't be dumped on the market. It all had to be destroyed.
Yes, it was.
And many, many other things were built that way so that it wouldn't hit the civilian market after the war.
Well, Mr. Sarnoff can't make any money if you bring back stuff and sell it surplus at very cheap prices.
No, then he can't keep up NBC broadcasting either.
I think you have to focus on the real meaning behind that. That's why they dump this stuff.
I know.
So they have to build more.
Well, then there's another little thing in the body of this article is rather nice. They also said that the Naval Investigative Services are investigating an international theft ring, which are selling stolen F-14 parts to Iran. Now, it would seem to me that an American to sell something to the Ayatollah, that would just drive me up the wall.
But you understand, if we make a lot of money selling weapons to Iraq, we have to sell them to Iran so the war keeps up so you can sell them to Iraq.
That's very Swiss of us, isn't it?
Well, that's what we're doing. Okay.
Now another one. Now this is really something. With mortgage funds hard to come by, just hard to come by, the Army is seeking a mortgage to build a base. Now, can you believe that?
For $400 million.
$400 million, and the payments are $50 million a year. I don't think I can make those payments.
This is the Washington Post. Incidentally, these are clippings that I got out just 1 week out of the newspaper. We're giving a cross section from papers around the country. Army base. The interest on that.
Well, it must be fantastic because it's $50 million a year payments.
They said this is the first time this has been done this way.
Well, that's probably true. I wonder if it's a 30 or 20-year mortgage. It must be a 30-year mortgage.
What do you think of that one, Tom?
Well, they'll save money if they make it a 15 or 20-year mortgage.
Okay, we're going to be back with more news of the world as we see it after these messages. I'm with Tom Davis and Mae Brussell. This is John Arlen. This is the KMFO Forum. And right now we'll open up the phones, even though we're not quite through with all this stuff. You don't open the phones yet?
Let's wait 15 minutes.
Let's go for 15 minutes. We'll be back after these messages. Mae Brussell and Tom Davis, and we're discussing this week's news, which is rather amazing. Despite heavy security, a car bomb exploded in Lima, Peru, on the eve of the nation's presidential inauguration. The blast occurred in front of the military building, and at least one passerby was injured. And former Ugandan President Idi Amin is keeping close tabs on a coup in his homeland. Amin's successor was overthrown today in Saudi Arabia. Amin attended a meeting about the change in leadership. Idi Amin is a black example of Mengele, isn't he?
Well, he admired Adolf Hitler and wanted to emulate him. And Premier Key last week said he wants to return to Vietnam. And Hugo Banzer looks like he's going to be back in Bolivia. He hired Klaus Barbie for his security down there in the death squads in Bolivia. So Idi Amin and Premier Key and Banzer will be doing a ballet to what we had a few years ago.
Key wants to go back to Vietnam. He figures he can run that place again, huh?
Yeah. Well, sure, Banzer can run Bolivia. Why not?
Well, then there's another story this week about radon gas may contaminate 1 million homes. Radon gas is the resultant of of the decay of radioactive material. Radon gas happens to be one of the things that come out of it. And what's really made this, and the story doesn't say so, what really has caused this is the energy crisis, because we've done so much to insulate a home that we never really ventilate one, and the radon builds up in the home. Yes, anything, I think, that puts out nuclear particles can cause cancer. One is plutonium as well as radon gas. But I think in this particular case...
Yeah, but they're saying, John, that can arise in anybody's home. I am very suspicious of that story, because for years, people who have had Geiger counters or scintillator, anybody can detect the radiation, have found practically all airliners in the United States contaminated from the haulage of nuclear materials used for medicine. And the highways are contaminated from trucking the stuff around.
This is closed in where there's no air.
And if you say, well, I know that.
This isn't on the highway. This is in the home. 30,000 lung cancer deaths may be caused each year without ventilation if you use this particular kind of gas.
If it's dropped from airplanes, if it's dropped from trucking along highways, the stuff
We're talking about in the house. We're not talking about in the air.
I know that, but let me finish.
Yeah.
It can eventually be spread all over.
Well, my problem with that, I have to disagree a little bit. If you have any concrete in your building, some of the particles or some of the aggregate that goes into the concrete is radioactive.
If the aggregate is radioactive to start with, and not all of it is.
Much of it is, and I'll dispute you. The fact that I can take a scintillator and I can find radioactivity in most basements.
You can find a background radiation anywhere.
Okay, and I'm saying if it decays at all, it's going to turn into radon gas. Now, radon gas, the first time anybody heard about it was the 3 Mile Island incident, where the decaying gases were escaping from that particular facility. More than that, deuterium and tritium, which are the two radioactive isotopes of hydrogen, or escaped in steam. They were part of the water molecules. I think that when we start talking about radon, it's not ordinarily classified as a health hazard. I mean, it's used in many places. It's one of the inert gases chemically, just like xenon and neon, the ones you see signs made out of. But I'm wondering how far...
Well, it further decays to lead, though, so it is radioactive.
Radon doesn't decay. Radon will not decay to lead.
But the UBI story says that it's coming through pipes, through the sewer, and up through the cracks in the floor.
No, I disagree with that.
You do?
Okay.
All
anyway.
of those are...
I'm merely saying it's an interesting story, but I don't know how you'd prove 30,000 people were killed with it.
Okay.
Okay, now we have the Falashes, which are the black people they brought out of Ethiopia, the Jewish black people, and they go through a ceremony that Christians might call something like baptism, where you immerse them or clean them in water.
Well, they were taken to Israel on the basis that airlifted, on the basis that they were Jews, and there was a lot of controversy leaving Ethiopia. And then as soon as they arrived there, they were put into hospitals, not with the general population. And last week they were told they had to take a mikveh. That's the bath to become Jews. They're not Jews.
I see.
But they're still in hospitals.
Oh, I see. Now, the situation is, are we seeing, being so it's attached to hospitals, are we seeing the hand of Mengele again?
Yeah, this is out of a Jewish newspaper, The Heritage. It says the San Diego researchers are working on Ethiopian Jews to find a virus linked to certain types of cancer, and they're doing medical experiments on them that they have an unusual cell and antibodies. So they were rounded up out of the Sudan, put in hospitals in Israel, and now the doctors from America are doing work on them because of certain parts of their body to fight cancer.
Well, this is one family of viruses related to the AIDS virus, HTLV3, and which apparently originated in Zaire, which is in Africa.
Well, they weren't showing this at the time. Well, the question is, were they airlifted? I wonder, being suspicious by nature by these days, were they airlifted for the purpose of experimentation and didn't intend to melt them into the Jewish community, which they haven't done.
You see, experimentation as opposed to humanitarianism.
Exactly.
Okay. I think that I'm wondering what goes on there, because this same week, if we look at the news, there sits one of our leading movie actors that is in a Paris hospital with AIDS. Also claimed to have liver cancer. Is AIDS becoming something somebody's going to pay any attention to? This administration so far, and including all the public health things in every state, have sort of almost denied that it exists. They haven't put any money up to solve it or anything else. Yet the stuff's fatal. Once you get it, I guess it's the Katie bar the door, so to speak. So with a leading movie actor in the hospital in Paris being treated for AIDS. What do you think? Do you think more awareness is going to be?
Yes, well, I certainly do, because in Zaire and most of the cases in Europe, and the original cases went to Haiti, were just about divided equally among male and female. And for some reason or other, when it got to the United States, it ended up in the gay communities in New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. So it looks very suspicious. And that's why some researchers have felt that AIDS was actually induced into the gay population by some sinister forces. But it looks very mysterious.
Who have done testing throughout the country on various elements of society.
Okay.
For other purposes.
Getting around the AIDS problem, because it's a problem that's ongoing. Let's get to the next thing. Remember when the Grenada, we've been talking about the Grenada invasion for a long time. Everybody seemed to want to bring back Russian weapons, all these Russian weapons. And all the enlisted men got hung for it, and the admiral who brought him back for his collection, he just got a slap on the wrist. And the inspector general of the Defense Department saying, well, you really did an inadequate investigation, and I believe they really they applied the law partially. That is to say, they were partial to the admiral and not very partial to the enlisted men.
Well, as anybody's been in the service, like you and I, John, knows that rank has its privilege.
You can do anything you want. Okay, so he takes the weapons home and they say, we'll let you off. I mean, that's just one of 30 articles this week where people got off for something.
Well, what bothers me is here's the guy that commanded this invasion of Grenada, where the press wasn't invited. And we decided we're going to have, from now on, the administration is going to have a system of trying to keep the press away by bringing only those people that they desire to be on these things. What do you think about that? Don't you think that censorship?
I think it should apply to all people, and certainly the men say who ordered the $600 ashtrays, they were removed from office and they were put back. The ones who take the weapons home are put back. There is no punishment for anything, it seems, no matter how hard.
Well, the enlisted men got punished on the other thing, and the one that makes it interesting about the San Diego $600 ashtray, the fellow that was a procurement officer about a month before said, look, I don't want to pay this much for something out of the GAO, out of the central catalog. Can I buy this cheaper model? And they sent back, no, you got to buy it out of the catalog. Now, my question is, isn't that sort of telling policy? You either buy that from our vendors or you don't buy it at all.
Well, then the problem is who put in the catalog.
Well, or who said you can't buy out of the catalog? That's the problem. But I don't think we'll ever find out who that is, but that'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah.
Now, there's some more costly Army gear missing. Tom, I don't know how we're getting into the Army on this stuff.
$31 million missing.
That's a lot of money.
From Army maneuvers.
Well, aren't these just additional cases of somebody sucking the government tip?
Yeah, but how?
I know.
I used to add up. I don't have time anymore. Maybe I should go back to the files. And I had a section called Missing Millions, out of banks, out of gold, and people that were locked up and bank accounts emptied out. Here's $31 million. This is a different story than the Kitty Hawk or anything else. This is the L.A. Times this week. $31 million out of a maneuver.
Most people look at the way things work ass backwards.
Yeah.
It's how much you can steal, not how much you can prevent from being stolen. Well, that's the way things work.
Well, here's another interesting story. We're talking about these slush funds in Swiss banks, okay? Now, the House votes not to give any more money to none of the $28 million, for example, that President Reagan requested for the Nicaraguan rebels next year. But what they do instead is significantly ease a ban of Central Intelligence Agency involvement with the insurgents. Now, if they got these bank accounts all over the world, what the hell they need with $28 million? They got 450 we're talking about in the Swiss bank.
You give it a soldier a fortune, and those mercenaries, they go in and do it. The money's in the Swiss banks.
Well, that's my question. So it's sort of like every time I hear the Golden Finger Award or whatever it is Proxmire puts out, you got me?
Golden Fleece.
Golden Fleece. How much of that money, it says...
I think it's a golden finger.
Well,
you're right, John.
Just the way I perceive things.
I don't think it's a fleece.
You guys are always getting me in trouble like that. Anyway, how much of the money that go into these supposed intellectual or scholastic studies is really money that goes to the CIA, or how they get their $450 million.
Yeah.
The other way they could possibly get the $450 million is by dope running and all the other things that people have blamed on them. I'm not sure that's true or
the
anything
government
else.
gives all the intelligence agencies the best estimates that people who know have ever come up with. They're about $20 billion a year. Now,
Okay.
they know, none of them admit to that,
Yeah.
but they still want more.
But now, once they voted in Congress that humanitarian money for the Contras, this July the 19th, the Washington Post, now they've come in and said, well, we'll ease our restrictions. You can share it with the CIA.
Okay.
Congress says, okay, be humanitarian.
We're almost to the end of the half hour. The one story I wanted to get in,
Okay.
the one story, is about this AIM group. I heard this guy on our station today, this fellow,
Oh, my gosh.
this Reed Irvine, the founder.
Uh-huh.
And he's up to a lot of no good here.
He wants to sit in college class.
Yeah, he wants to sit there and that's right, sit in the college class. And if mommy is a commie, be sure to turn her in. That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think they should be off campus. I think a professor should be allowed to teach.
Well, he doesn't really believe in academic freedom, is what he's saying. You cannot talk anything, in academic freedom.
And believe me, they're not hired easily or quickly. In the first place, they're screened. The board, whoever hires professors.
Well, he says there are 10 to 20,000 Marxist professors. Okay?
Do you believe that?
Yeah, they're all up. According to the people around here, the rednecks, they're all up at UCSC. Every one of them is up there, and
Well, I
they're
think
just.
most of the kids up there are fascists. I haven't.
Well,
Thank God.
Well, it depends. See, now nobody here has ever
This is
defined this
ridiculous.
stuff. What's a fascist? What's a Marxist?
Isn't
And
it like
he's-
Joe McCarthy, 10 to 20,000?
All
Yeah.
Irvine wants is he
Isn't
just
that-
wants people that agree with him.
Well, that's what most people want, but we don't want people to agree with them ourselves. We'd like them to call after this break. Our numbers are 688-5804 and 475-5527. This is the KMFO Forum. I'm John Arlen, with me Mae Brussell, and also Tom Davis. And we'll be back after these messages. Okay, we were talking about AIM, and it appears to me that AIM just doesn't like the way people are teaching things. They probably don't like the way people teach evolution, the same type of thing. Are we going to put people in a classroom to make sure that Genesis is preached? It's this week, just to show you, the Boy Scouts of America, kid was up for Life Scout, which is just right under being an Eagle Scout, and they turned him away because he didn't believe in a supreme being.
This is so disgusting. This country is it's galloping fascism, and there better be some breaks.
I hope there's no federal money going to the Boy Scouts of America under those circumstances, because that would be really adding to a state religion, because we're saying unless you believe in a supreme being, you can't be in this institution. Now, that's nonsense.
Well, you have to go in the founding of the Boy Scouts. That was also very political, too, the background of the Boy Scouts. But I think the whole administration, the Heritage Foundation, and Richard Allen, and William Clark, and Edwin Meese, and these people, Ronald Reagan, are there to get all of the people as far right as they can.
Is to get them far right, so they'll buy a dictatorship by the oil companies, which is the subject of tonight's show.
To get them as far right as they can.
Okay, a person far right would accept totalitarian government.
Yeah.
We're saying we must conform. In other words, everything must be conformed to, or otherwise.
To question your government, and this has been written up on various papers, to question your government is to aid the enemy.
Well, it's especially true now, because to question what the president does, which, for example, the Justice Department, which is under the President of the United States, let Pressler go this week, the Teamster that should certainly have been brought to trial. He wasn't brought to trial. He certainly must be a friend of somebody in power.
Yeah, but in a dictatorship, all these laws are thrown out.
I understand that, but
They don't apply.
we're not talking about a dictatorship. We're talking about a Jeffersonian democracy that we all support. And
Well, we haven't had it since the Civil War, though.
oh, I understand.
Let's not go. Let's go 1960
Well, let's go on a fur
Dallas.
piece back, yeah.
Well, that's going for a piece back.
Okay.
That's right. Because
Let's
as I
just go to
recall,
Dallas. I don't want to go to the Civil War. Come on.
you don't want to go
We
to
don't have
Ford
that
Theater.
much time in 2 hours.
You don't
No.
want to go to Ford Theater.
No, I
Okay,
will,
let's
but
get back to the oil
okay.
companies. Let's see what happened this week in the oil companies. First thing that happened that I saw in the paper that was rather interesting was the fact that the Reagan administration is now allowing the automobile firms in America to lower the miles per gallon they have to put out in a car on their average. To much chagrin to Lee Iacocca, who has brought Chrysler back from the depths of depression into a viable motor company, who can meet the regulation, and he lets Ford and General Motors off the hook. Now, I have to admit, I wasn't much for bailing out Chrysler, giving public funds to bail the company out. But now that it's back and it's doing its thing, I am of the opinion that that's unfair competition. Tom, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it certainly is, and if I was Iacocca, I'd be really mad, too, about it.
I'd be in court. How about you, Mae?
Well, I would assume that General Motors and Ford, being the fascist group that they were, they put Adolf Hitler into power, had a good responsibility for it, did it for the things that they wanted done, and they've continued the policy since the war, and their interest is in using up oil and buying oil from the oil companies and sharing those profits with each other. And so I would expect this from them.
Let's go a little bit further into oil, something else that happened. That's the first thing. The second thing is that OPEC met. And it seems that the OPEC is about ready to fold because nobody's buying, keeping oil prices high, because all these countries are so far in debt, they have to sell oil almost for what they can get for it in order to pay off the indebtedness that was established after everybody said, well, oil's going to this price, we'll lend you all this money. Now, that's the second thing. So we know that what we're really trying to say, what I'm trying to say is that the wellhead price of oil, I think the spot market's down to about 26, isn't it, Tom?
Well, I think it's lower than that. It's hard to say what they really are selling oil for because there's so much cheating and behind-the-scenes contracts. It's very difficult.
But we do know this, that the price of gasoline, at least at one of the low-price stations here for non-leaded gasoline where I buy mine, has gone from $1.59 to $1.19 since
the oil glut.
Since the oil glut, yes. So it appears to me that quantity to demand isn't really what makes oil prices. And if that doesn't make oil prices, guess what? We have what is known as the Sherman Antitrust Act, which prevents this price sort of.
And the Clayton Act of 1914.
That's right.
Neither of which has been enforced since Harry Truman was in the presidency.
Well, for good reason. The only time I can remember anything was when Kennedy got on the steel company's case back in the early 60s, and I recall the famous joke that went something like this. Mr. Roger Blau was the president of U.S. Steel, and he said, I'm going to raise money to have Kennedy elected Pope. And I said, well, do you want to do that for? He said, well, then all I'd have to do is kiss his ring. But years ago, my father went to...
I think that's funny, Mae.
Well, I had a different image.
Oh. My father was...
Particularly since he's always on the ground, leaning over.
My father was it's very difficult to get through these laughs here. But, not that funny. My father was at an Engineers Club meeting.
Give up, John.
Engineers Club meeting about 1922, and a funny thing happened. Will Rogers, who was quite a curmudgeon back in his day, and he said, everything I know, I read in the paper, that sort of thing. But this one was very funny. They had all these junior executives. It had to be Sun Oil Company, and they own DX now, and there was the Pugh family of Philadelphia. And it came up, and he had about a minute that he could speak because he had to catch a train to get to New York. And all these young executives were saying, our motto of our company is going to be service to the public. And it seems that Will gets up and said, well, he says, back where I come from in Oklahoma, the only service to the public the oil companies give there is the same kind of service my father's bull gives the neighbor's cow. But
back on that subject.
When I was a little kid, we used to think the Pew Oil Company was funny in itself.
Well, there's
P-E-W.
That's right, Pew. No, it's P-U-G-H.
Yeah, but Mr. Wigner from Western Goals works for Pew Oil. It's very current these days.
So anyway, we're back to oil. So we have wellhead oil prices down. We have prices at the pump up.
Yeah.
We have oil company profits, with the exception of two big ones. Exxon had a very, very unprofitable quarter. They were fined for overcharging for oil back when the first, saying this was new oil and that's old oil, and the famous Nixon, let's shift the oil around a little bit. And they lost a little money there. And I understand Arco didn't quite have the profitable quarter, and I can understand that because Arco has a problem with no credit cards and everybody runs on plastic. So we're going to take another little bit of a break here. This is John Arlen along with Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. This is the KMFO Forum. And why don't you call us? Our numbers are 688-5804 or 475-5527. 688-5804 or 475-5527. We'll be right back. My name is John Arlen. With me, Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. Speaking of oil, we have an interesting story last week from Flight 847. And Yuli Dickerson, who was the purser, the person who handles the money around that thing. It seems they got into an airport, and they got in an airport where they were going to fly out to Beirut, and nobody had any credit to buy gasoline to get out, so she bought 6,000 gallons of jet fuel on her credit card. Now, it just goes to show you how far plastic would go. That 6,000 gallons, by the way, cost $11,000, and the particular fixed-base operator wouldn't accept, anything except a credit card because TWA didn't have credit in that particular country.
She had to pay.
We have a guest on the line. Bill is on line one. Let's talk to Bill. Bill, you're on KMFO. What can we do for you?
I wondered, seeing how the CIA is so involved in the drug traffic from foreign countries, or maybe the Nazi connection is, how come they let so many small growers exist in the States? How come camp doesn't totally eliminate all of them?
Well, I don't think, my own opinion, most of the small growers in the state are growing grass. I think the big deal and the big money is in things like heroin and cocaine. Mae, do you believe that?
Well, no, I have statistics of California marijuana, and it is something like $42 million a year, and they like the money spent in the banks here, and it's big business, so they let it grow for the same reason it grows in Bolivia or Turkey. It's for the money.
I see. In other words, you think that some of these other functionaries are getting profits from the stuff, the little homegrown grass?
Of course. You don't see the farmers spending that $42 million a year.
Yes, and with all the raids, and we figure that $3 to $5 billion a year is what the marijuana crop's worth.
See, our banks would collapse if they didn't have drug money in them now. They're actually built upon drug money. Don't you think so, Tom? They want this drug money, and that's why they allow it.
Well, they want anybody's money.
Yeah, but there's more money in drugs than anything else.
Well,
for the amount of work put in, I suppose that's true.
Oh, sure.
Bill, any other questions?
Well, lately they've been noticing a lot of laundered money going through the banks. Isn't that mostly the big deals going through? That isn't the small grower.
No.
Oh, well, some of it. No, wait a minute. A guy could. You see, the rule is anything over $10,000 in cash deposits have to be reported.
Mm-hmm.
Except they're not.
Well, I'm just saying. We know the Bank of Boston didn't,
and the Continental Illinois,
and we know that Bank of America just got caught in the same
and Chase
scam.
Manhattan.
There's a whole slew of banks around the Miami area that haven't been doing it for years, and they were B.B. Rebozo's bank and
the rest of the people. So that it's easy.
Even the Vatican Bank.
Okay,
that's written up in a thing. Was written up in an article called Nixon and the Mafia, which appeared in a magazine called Sundance Magazine in 1972, and the magazine only lasted 3 issues. Well, that ought to tell you something.
Well, what I guess I'm saying, the average guy can go on and on. $10,000, or you follow me, is not very much for a whole crop of marijuana, even around here. Mendocino County, some of the growers are pulling in $200,000-$300,000
Well, they'll bust somebody who has 2 pots on their windowsill because they need a police force. That's called Drug Enforcement Agency.
Well, I heard one lady down here in Live Oak back in the early 70s got picked up for having one, and she said, I just thought it was a pretty plant. Bill, have we answered your question?
Thank you.
And thank you for calling.
One evening, I was raising some small tomatoes from these plant seed things and thinned them out. And I have a friend that lives down at Big Sur, and I wanted to give her some plantings, and I didn't want to go all the way down the coast. So I said, I'll leave them at the Bank of America at Rio Road, where you pull in and drive in, because she was going down the coast around 5 in the afternoon or 6. I'll put these tomato plants there, and you can go pick them up. And I called her, did you get the plant? She said, no. I went into the bank the next day and said, by any chance, did somebody see these tomato plants? And the woman said, I took them home, showed my mother, and we stomped on them. We thought they were marijuana.
Well, there was a scam years ago.
I guess they do look sort of like
they do, at young plants. Yes. But there was a scam years ago, something about hops being of the same family of marijuana. So you made a marijuana root, you got me, and you
and your beer was...
Well, no, you took the hops plant, and what do they call that? Grafted it on there, and you made hot hops.
Well, that's true.
What a drink of beer that would be, I guess. I don't like this stuff myself. I happen to be very allergic to it. I can hardly walk in a room with it because it makes my pulse go like 190. Yeah. But so many people smoke it.
Yeah.
We're sitting here looking at thousands of people as lawbreakers because a group of people want to stamp it out. Now, the latest, which is in your news thing today, pot causes AIDS.
Marijuana causes AIDS.
So if you're a pot-smoking homosexual living in San Francisco,
a hippie,
you got a problem, man. You're going to have AIDS.
Well, see, I think that this goes back to when Peter Bourne was working from the Defense Department into the drug agency with Jimmy Carter, and Dow Chemical was given $43 million. They gave $43 million, and down to Mexico to put chemicals into the marijuana. And I felt that the drugs coming back to this country would hit a certain segment of our population. And the same Dow Chemical was involved with Bhopal and with the poisoning of the watermelons in California. Now, if you smoke marijuana, what is there? What do you think is in there that they can connect the marijuana to AIDS? Is it some chemicals or something that they have there?
this is all just a smokescreen. It's blown up out of all proportions. The whole thing is ridiculous. What they're saying is that pot smoking lowers your immune system. Well, good God, coffee lowers your immune system.
Aspirin does, a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
All sorts of things.
And we're looking at something that's quite innocuous. It's like when we were talking before, when I disagreed with him about. I have the same opinion about radon.
Yeah.
You see, we both can have an opinion. I'm just saying we're blowing things way the heck out of proportion. But I will say this. Getting back to that, to seal a house up, as the government wanted us all to do, isn't very healthy.
Yeah.
So
but besides, maybe you don't get those 33,000 cancers, or maybe the people having marijuana won't get AIDS. But besides what's really happening, then there's all this scare stuff so that everyone is thinking of sickness.
That's right. We had the watermelon thing. But
now
this seems to be a Republican phenomena. The watermelon thing just before 4th of July. When does everybody eat watermelon?
You know, when Reagan was governor,
the cranberries.
And the cranberries just before the Thanksgiving. This is. But
remember when Reagan was governor, we had 8 years of all these crises and different things, and when Jimmy Carter's president, we didn't have any of this. When Nixon was the COINTEL. This is a Republican phenomenon where this escalation of the CIA and the COINTEL programs, Operation Chaos, can unleash these people to be totally crazy.
Well, that's totally crazy. I think they're making the public totally crazy. We're blaming things on stuff that I see no statistical relationship.
Well, how will people?
Well, that doesn't matter. They own the media, and what you believe is what you see and hear.
Well, you're talking like the guy from AIM now, but let's wait about 2 minutes, and we'll be back with more with Mae Brussell, Tom Davis, and me, John Arlen, on the KMFO Forum. And you can call us by calling 688-5804 or 475-5527. 688-5804 or 475-5527. We'll be back after these messages. Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. We're talking about big oil and just how they affect us. Everything we do requires energy or requires plastics anymore. Now, you got to remember that plastics are made of oil. Your detergent you use to wash your clothes with is made of oil. There's so many products that come from oil, you wonder why they let anybody burn it. An interesting story to get back to oil and gas and coal and all those things. In Cayeta, Arizona, which is in the northeast corner of the state, last month the power plant blew up. 4,000-pound steam line let go, killed 5 people, and injured 27.
One of the coal-fired plants.
Yes. Of course, they use higher pressures than nukes. So nobody ever heard anything of it. Even the local paper at Cayeta didn't publish it. Of course, the Indians are very much wrapped up in this because they run the mine, and that is to say, they offer the labor for the mine. The mine's owned by Peabody. And the other thing is that they also run the machinery to mine the coal, so that it may be in their best interest not to say they had a problem. But it would seem to me if you had a 4,000-pound steam line, which they don't have at nuke plants, the highest they go is 2,000, that blew up in one that's way the heck out in no man's land, you'd have a story for 27.
How many died?
5 died and 27 were serious.
Didn't make any of the news stories?
Didn't make any news story anywhere.
Not the local or anywhere?
Nowhere.
Why not?
Because I think nobody wanted to tell about what went on there. The people involved were able to contain it. Now, how much news is contained is what I'm talking about. We're talking about oil companies and what they do. How much news is contained? If a ship leaves a big oil slick off the coast, you can see it, and it's very difficult to contain. If the ship breaks up out in the middle of the ocean and floats into shore, it's pretty easy to contain who did it.
If one person's killed, the story usually breaks.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of news in the United States that's contained that we never hear about. Professor Jensen up at Sonoma State College up north of here puts out a list every year, the 10 biggest stories that we're Maybe not suppressed, but
well, I have them on Kazoo every week. They're on one paper and not in all the other chains around the country. One paper will have a story,
let's talk about Kazoo. You have a program on Monday night on KAZU. What's the frequency?
90.7.
90.7. It's a
from
public
8 to 9.
8 to 9 on Monday nights. It's a public broadcast station.
And I try to limit or have on my program stories that people aren't seeing on the wire services, that if you don't take at least 10 papers a day, you wouldn't have any idea what was going on.
I understand that. And we're looking at a situation where people aren't really kept informed. And so the news itself gets disjointed because you don't see any connections. This happened here, that happened there. And just today, going through the news stories that you gathered this week, the connections got fairly obvious. Mengele, for example, is he dead or not? And you said a long time ago he wasn't dead.
The German government says they won't know till September, but that's only one paper. That just came out of one paper. Houston Post. How is it that doesn't make the headlines on the evening news?
Okay,
if it's headlines he died, why isn't it headlines he didn't die?
The story about the oil companies cheating on paying the government for their oil and coal that they were taking out of government reservations, they were running it on the side. That never hit the paper till years later. Nobody ever blew the whistle. So when things happen out in the boondocks, so to speak, we never really hear about it. And the ability to go through the paper, the Washington Post and the Washington Times. Now, let's face it, that's both sides of the coin. One's the Mooney organization, which is very conservative and probably, one might say, totalitarian by the way that Moon is, and the Washington Post, which is the one that broke the story on Nixon's
But, in all fairness, now I take the Washington Times. I really like their news.
Is that right?
Oh, their editorials are, so far right. But the point, they all have a full-page story on why there's no Bulgarian connection with the Shah shooting the Pope and how it was all concocted. Even though they work with the people who concocted it, they'll have a long story, and the other newspapers have pushed it to the back burner.
Well, let's take Aramco, which many of our oil companies are involved in. Aramco's connection with OPEC, for example. OPEC being the oil-producing companies cooperative, and Aramco being the cartel that controls the output of oil from there. Now, those people obviously can control the price. After it comes from OPEC to Aramco, they can do anything they want with it. And Aramco has such people in it as Shell Oil, British Oil, and a whole bunch of other. The top seven. And we're looking at...
No, not exactly, but there are four American companies in Aramco.
Well, who are the four American companies? I know that British Petroleum...
Well, Texaco, Standard of Southern California, Standard of Cal, and Exxon, which used to be Standard New Jersey, and Mobil.
Well, I always liked when Exxon changed...
It's essentially a Rockefeller company.
Okay, I always liked when they changed SO to Exxon. Did you notice that they went from two S's, which is crooked, to a double cross?
Yeah.
But
they never thought of that. They had this huge search for a company.
I heard, and I'm not sure this story's true, I heard that Esso means stalled car in Japanese, and so they went to Exxon. That's what I heard. It might be so much baloney, but that's what I heard anyway. Anyhow, we're into this thing, into the oil, and the control that they have over the Middle East must be fantastic. They're almost like a state within itself. I remember Jimmy Carter once said that he couldn't do anything because the oil companies had all the control.
Well, they have control over us, too.
They have the control. You have to think about the control, though. First of all, it is a worldwide cartel. But the thing that makes it so strong is that they have a cradle-to-the-grave arrangement, so to speak. They control the production of the oil, the drilling of the wells, and the pumping out of the ground. Then they control all of the transportation. Then they control, Exxon they have huge fleets of tankers that go all over the world hauling the oil they dig up. Then, of course, they have all the refineries. They control all those, and they control all the distribution of the oil and gas at the pump. Now, it's the state of Washington tried to pass a bill in that state that no oil company could control the
could have a vertical monopoly.
There are, I think, 3 refineries up on Puget Sound. They couldn't have a vertical monopoly. Literally, they couldn't control. If you produced the oil, then you couldn't be a refiner, and if you were a refiner, you couldn't be a producer, or you couldn't be a retailer
or a distributor.
Now that would make oil worth what it really is worth today at the pump, about 30 cents a gallon for gas.
Well,
and
getting back to this.
How long did it get through?
But see, they control all of this so that way they can make the worldwide cartel work. It wouldn't work otherwise, if you think about it.
That's very true. Getting back to another subject in Texas, the Railroad Commission owns their oil companies. In the news this week, it had to do with the natural gas belonged to Phillips, and anybody that drilled oil had to give them the natural gas. So that what the producers there were doing was cooling down the oil coming out to make liquefied natural gas. It's about time that we take a 5-minute or 6-minute break for the news, and we'll be back after that. This is John Arlen on KMFO's Forum, along with Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. And we'll see you in about 6 minutes when we're going to talk to a local restaurateur. See you at 6 after. My name is John Arlen. With me, Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. We're discussing oil. There's more oil stories around here, too, just to mention a few. One story has to do with the offshore drilling, which some accommodation is made with the Interior Department as far as offshore drilling is concerned in this county. Certainly the Monterey Bay, which is a bay that doesn't have any circulation at all, would be a terrible place to put an oil well, because if it ever leaked, you'd never get it out of the bay. The search for oil and the wealth therein is a big business, and we've been pushed on by the Secretaries of Interior forever. A famous Secretary of Interior that says that trees pollute, for example. This sort of thing is
well, the president who says if you've seen one redwood, you've seen them all.
No, that's true, and he was the same guy when he was governor for the person to choose to look out after the natural resources, especially our forests, was the president of Weyerhaeuser. Always,
can you see with summer vacation, all the campers out here now, that everyone goes around one redwood tree? It'd sort of be like the Coliseum with the Aid concert.
Well, either that or like a
one redwood tree and all the cars parked around it.
It'd be like a maypole.
Yeah, a maypole, and
May Day has gotten
90,000 campers going around to see the redwood.
I mean, May Day lately is going downhill. I can remember when May Day meant all the little girls ran around this
with
pole
ribbons,
with ribbons, and nowadays it's the communist holiday all over the world, May Day. So. It's like the word gay. There were songs that said, having such a gay time. If you said that now, they'd send them to Polk Street, so I don't know. Yeah. But oil companies in general have been in the seedier side of life for years. Certainly the first Rockefeller method of controlling oil out of Titusville was the ability to control the transportation of that, getting special compensation or dispensation from Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central, who his buddies were in charge of. So oil has always had a bad reputation. Big oil has, it's like...
well, the people have had the reputation.
Well, I'm talking about people involved in the business are like used car dealers. People say, oh, you're a murderer, thief, or a used car dealer. It's just a bad reputation. And they don't do anything to dispel it.
Well, you take someone like John J. McCloy. He set up the oil cartels, didn't he, Tom? The original...
he worked for the Rockefeller oil cartel.
Wasn't he the head of the cartel after the war that set up the major companies?
Well, he was, the American cartel. There was always the British.
Yeah, but John J. McCloy was there, the American.
Yeah,
he was on the board of Chase Manhattan.
Right.
And he also, as the first commissioner after the war, released all the top Nazis and was on the Warren Commission. And, John J. McCloy designed the Pentagon building and decided when we went into the Battle of the Bulge, he decided with Earl Warren to round up the Japanese and put them into concentration camps.
Well, some people said that was so they could give the Japanese land to the Okies, who were becoming a problem, and Mr. Steinbeck was writing about it.
Yeah, but can't you dispense of these things coming out of the earth with people with a little broader spectrum of what the world is about?
No, you can't, because it's a scam. See, the oil is everywhere. We're floating on a sea of oil. The only way you can keep the price up to make the money they do is to artificially inflate the price.
Like De Beers does with diamonds.
Yeah, it's a cartel.
Or the oil wells.
They've been doing this ever since the oil wells, at least since Rockefeller started doing it after 1870.
Well, I got a question. Let's talk about a little thing here that hit my head. Now, listen to me. Listen out to this a little bit. When oil was cheap at $3 a barrel or $2 a barrel, it would seem to me that if you were a smart oil man, what you would do is you'd bring a whole bunch of oil into this country and you'd pump it down old wells. Okay? And then you'd go over there and say, hey, Arabs, take that oil and take the price up. And all you do, you've already robbed a bunch of it and put in old wells in Texas or someplace, you just pump it out again. And you say, oh, look at here, we found some more.
No.
Now, I wouldn't put it past them because some of the things that they've done have been about that bad. We're talking about during the Second World War, for example, we all lived then, and we probably remember gas rationing, and the average person got three gallons a week. 3 gallons a week with one of General Motors' large cars wouldn't get you down 2 blocks.
They were funding the Nazi boats, U-boats, at the same time.
Yeah, the Canary Islands.
Yeah.
So we're talking...
Texaco was...
The United States couldn't use the oil, but the enemy, the Nazis, were getting it for their ships from the American oil companies.
Well, that's been said. That's not quite the point I was going to go to. I'm just
that's written up in the book, Trading with the Enemy.
No, but I think when you talk about mean people and oil, it again always keeps going back to fascism, whether you're profiting off of people by millions and millions of dollars, or secret bank accounts, or poisoning food, or polluting the air, or raising energy prices. They're the same mean people running the show.
It's like dope. It's on the cutting edge of really unethical business.
Well, getting back to oil has a little bit different.
That's what I'm talking about, oil. Oil is a very unethical type of business, and it has some real...
Okay, but let's talk about what a limit of oil...
Real crooks in it.
Yeah. Let's talk what a limit of oil would do. If we look at a machine that's run by power, and the power is supplied by oil... All it does, really, from an economic point of view, is make a man stronger, right? And if I take that away from him, he has to manually do something that this other power would give to him.
Well,
so what I do...
Nobody's disputing that,
Okay,
John.
but what I do when I cut off oil, what I'm saying, and I'm just trying to put it in a different perspective, what I'm trying to say, when I cut off oil, I cut off a man's right arm.
Yeah.
I'm cutting off his ability to produce.
Well, who's cutting it off? The only people cutting it off are the oil companies.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If I cut off his ability to produce, I cut him into a situation where he's dependent upon...
They don't care. Look, during the 1973-74 so-called quote-unquote gas shortage, people saw them putting gasoline. The trucks would literally drive up in the middle of the night, midnight, and store gasoline in old, unused stations. And I don't know how long they stored it there. Eventually, I suppose they took it out. But there were many eyewitness accounts to this kind of shenanigans going on.
Well, I remember waiting for gas. I had to go to Willows, California every Monday, and it was really something because a pickup truck wouldn't go that far.
And it turned out none of that was necessary. In fact,
no, it wasn't.
It was Ibn Saud in Saudi Arabia who didn't want to raise the gas. And King Fahd, I forget which one. And
King Faisal.
King Faisal, rather. And he had a big argument with the Shah of Iran, whose money is in Chase Manhattan, with Henry Kissinger and the whole John J. McCloy. And Shah wanted it raised, and then the profits would come into the American bank. So King Faisal was killed, and his nephew was beheaded the next day with no trial, a hippie from Berkeley on acid. And the oil prices went up. Then we started standing in line. Isn't that the way it happened?
That's right. In 79, the same shenanigans went on. But the point of this is that they have used OPEC, the oil companies, the American oil companies, the cartel have used OPEC as a whipping boy. I personally do not think, from my studies, that OPEC ever did have any power.
Well,
they literally
it's obvious
were told,
they don't now.
Who has the most power?
Well, the families that own the money in the world, the people that have the power.
Yeah.
I understand that.
But they own the oil companies, and it goes on down the line.
Like Queen Juliana with Royal Dutch Shell.
Yeah, right.
Well, this situation with oil, for example, it was said that at one time that the Vietnam War was caused by the fact that...
they wanted oil off of Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia, but it doesn't appear to me yet that anybody's explored for any, even
well, they
Chinese
don't. That doesn't mean that they don't explore for it. They like to prove up roughly where the oil is, but they want the ultimate control. Now, this is literally why we went over and made peace with China.
I see.
In 1972.
Well, peace with China, and at present moment, another news story.
Yes.
Well, I should say good relations.
Okay, we're going to give them some nuclear power plants and a few other things to bring them into the 20th century, which it all adds into the situation we're talking about. This is the KMFO Forum. I'm John Arlen with Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. We'll be back after these messages. If you'd like to call us, it's 475-2027 or 688-5804. And we'll be right back. With me, Mae Brussell and Tom Davis, and we're discussing big oil and how it affects you. It affects us, so far we've known, ecologically by trying to drill wells out here. It affects our foreign policy by trying to keep good relations with countries we wouldn't ordinarily.
Your mobility, your price of things, transporting it, your ability to go visit people, visit the gasoline, airplanes. It affects everything you do.
Well, just think, back when they found it in Titusville, they didn't know what to do with that black gooey stuff except make kerosene to light lamps.
Well, they used it for medicine. That's why John D. Rockefeller's the first father was a traveling medicine man, and he was peddling this stuff.
Then they went from there to dope, huh?
Well, they went through all the Standard Oil empire, and now they're, so I'm told, among other very rich families in the country, have their individual cocaine plantations on the Amazon slopes of the Andes Mountains in Peru.
Well, I always thought the stuff came from Colombia. Like coffee, it's mountain grown.
Well, I don't know who owns the plantations in Colombia.
Well, this situation with oil. Tom, you have some bibliography of some books concerning oil, the history of oil, and how it's gotten to the powerful places in it at the present time. Let's talk about a couple of the books. You have one, The Oil Follies, 1970 to 80, for example. Is that a story about how the OPEC price rise was handled?
Both of them, the one in 73, 74, and the one in 79.
How much?
It's by Robert Sherrill, who's
he's good,
well-known author. He wrote a book about Chappaquiddick and Ted Kennedy, among others.
And also Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
Well, who publishes the book?
Well, the book is remaindered. We have it at a remaindered price now. It never came out in paperback, obviously.
Oh, I see.
Because most people don't feel they can afford hardcover books, so if they do buy one at all, they'll buy a paperback. And
how much is this one?
Oh, well, I'm selling it. It was originally $20 book. I'm selling it for $6.95.
It's a big, thick book. It's a lot for your money.
And it's called The Oil Follies of 1970-1980. And
if you'd like to get Tom's catalog, you can write to Tom Davis Books, Post Office Box 1107K, Aptos, California, 95003.
Then there's an earlier book here by John M. Blair called The Control of Oil, and subtitled or a comment by a reviewer, The Definitive Book on Oil. It was a marvelous book at the time it came out. The interesting thing about it was that the author, John Blair, died shortly after there, and his book was printed. But it is in paperback.
Yeah, just the time that he would be doing a tour with his book to promote it. He was dead. They were looking for him to do promotional tours and people, and it was the late Mr. Blair.
Well, I see, like the late Miss Silkwood.
Yeah, or like late Mr. Borkin, who did the book on the crime and punishment of I.G. Farben.
Right. But see, Blair did some no-nos in the ruling class. Sometimes you can actually do things that you may get killed for. And one interesting thing that Blair pointed out was that the oil companies are literally people that put Gaddafi in power. Now, what does the administration, what does the powers that be say about Gaddafi today? Well, you all know he's this Marxist terrorist, this crazy person.
Well, you can't be a Marxist terrorist if you're trained by Otto Skorzeny. He was Hitler's most dangerous man in Europe. I mean, the Galen Spy of the Century tells how he was trained.
Well, it appears, Mae, that we put names out, but these totalitarians, you've got me like Gaddafi and Idi Amin, that are terrorists.
Trained by Hitler and the BND, right?
Well, I say you really can't put a title on. They really don't care except for personal aggrandizement. In other words, how much personal power I get out of this.
Yeah, but the point is that our American oil companies are the ones who put Gaddafi in power.
Yeah.
Now, I can only say that 2-3 times to let it sink in.
I see. And Gaddafi is the one that they said was going to try to assassinate Reagan, and so they put all these barriers in front of the White House.
Yeah, well, and there are reasons for why the oil companies did put Gaddafi in there. They wanted to control the production of Libyan oil. They couldn't do it with King Idris, so they had to put their man in there. Now, Blair let this all loose. He also let loose the fact that the first oil crisis that occurred in 1973-74 was engineered mainly by the Rockefeller interests, the Shah of Iran, and Henry Kissinger.
Mostly.
Right?
I know,
And,
the same
that's
team.
a no-no.
Yeah.
That's, not supposed to tell about things like that.
Well, there was a story concerning Henry Kissinger and the Shah of Iran. Kissinger gave him permission so that he could raise the price of oil so he could buy more American arms. Is that story true, or am I just
And he
dreaming
was
it?
working with the Rockefeller banks.
Well, he's a Rockefeller protege, isn't he?
Yes.
Wasn't he the one that...
He handpicked him to go to Harvard, Brought him over after the war to go to Harvard,
Now, Henry Kissinger, as I recall, was an enlisted soldier in the Second World War. Is that right?
Well, enlisted or volunteered.
He's enlisted.
Enlisted man as opposed to being an officer. How did a fellow of this ilk ever get to the power he got to? You'd think that they'd have seen in the Second World War his tremendous powers of persuasion and promoted him or whatever.
Well, he was nurtured through university and Harvard, and then he wrote a book.
He was nurtured before then. He was nurtured when he was picked up by Fritz Kramer and was in charge of Klaus Barbie and Otto Skorzeny and the top Nazis after the war. This little punk was in his 20s and living in a castle.
Let's talk about that. Evidently you're telling me that Fritz Kramer and Kissinger were buddies.
Both Germans that came to this country.
There's no doubt about that.
And they were buddies. Now, there's also a little bit of information concerning that Fritz Kramer led two lives.
We're trying to find out. But when you talk about the control of oil, you have to end Chase Manhattan and Standard Oil, Exxon. You have to go back to John McCloy and their protege, Henry Kissinger, who's made all their policies since the overthrow of Iran.
Well, oil was fairly well controlled back in the teens in this country, and didn't they break up New Jersey Standard of the Sherman
1911.
Yes. Out of the Sherman Antitrust Act?
Part of the war between factions of the ruling class that brought this about. Rockefeller, if you think about it, is new money, nouveau riche, compared to the old money in the United States. And compared to the money in the English banking circles.
So that they did this to cut a little power from Rockefeller, who they thought was getting a little haughty?
Well, he was getting a little haughty. He was getting a little rich, too.
Well, rich makes...
money talks.
I understand that.
And he had this practical world cartel. There was only one company standing in his way. This was...
how about the Gettys?
The Shell Oil Company. No, the Gettys weren't that big.
They weren't?
No.
Oh.
And as I said, Sun didn't start till 1921, these other offshoots. It was all, according to my history, most of it before 1910 was all Standard Oil. That was it.
But the point I want to make about the nouveau riche is that, and most people don't realize this, is that when you talk about the 400, the rich people in the country, they send their children to certain schools, they go to certain watering holes, and there's certain people they associate with. Now, in, say, 1880, John D. Rockefeller, whose father was a traveling medicine man, you didn't talk to him.
No, that's
He hadn't arrived.
He's about as bad as an actor.
Just as in 1960, let's face it, the Kennedy family hadn't arrived yet.
Well, I'm just saying.
Old money didn't talk to the Kennedys. They still don't.
No.
Well,
didn't help either of them, Nelson Rockefeller.
So what do these nouveau riche people do? They try to climb the social ladder. They want to get in, what's the social register, and they want to become blue bloods like everybody else.
Well, I can remember Jack Kelly in Philadelphia, Grace Kelly's father. He was never acceptable for two reasons. Number one, he was Irish. Number two, he was Catholic in a Protestant area.
Now, the whole point of this, as far as the oil company is concerned, that in 1911. John D. Rockefeller was shown the powers that be. And they just showed him they could cut his oil cartel up into, what was it, 10 companies.
That's right.
10 little bits.
Yes.
And they did.
Well, this situation, as we're getting into it, we're seeing how a family really grew into the 400, so to speak, from oil. And we've seen ones from banking, and we've seen others from explosives like the DuPonts, and we've seen others from, like the Astors, from trading.
That's right. Well, the Astors couldn't talk to the Hudson Valley Dutch.
That's right.
See, he was new money in 1810.
I see.
But the old Dutch money that came over in 1660 and the English money that came over with the Duke of York, at that time, that was old money.
But I'm glad mine came in early.
Mine never
I'd
came
be
in.
nervous.
Well, you can't get very many people to look at this, but,
No.
the history of the human society is a history of families.
Now, at the Bohemian Club, where they're cavorting around this week...
I forgot about
Is that the old families in their tutus out there now?
Well, it's very interesting who they let in there.
Yeah.
Well, the
Because it's
Bohemian Club...
very, very interesting.
The Bohemian Club's been an argument for years and years.
Yeah.
Every time they have their little soiree.
Well, what they let in are their public servants who make policies that assure that their profits stay in.
Yeah, well, the evolution of the Bohemian Club is very interesting because originally it was artists and writers. Jack London.
Yeah, I understand.
Jack London belonged to the Bohemian Club.
Yeah.
But he'd never be invited today.
Well, I don't imagine any of the people that were originally there, if they were artists and writers, would invite you to those rednecks.
And, some very, very famous names, George Sterling and Ambrose Bierce.
Well, they took the property and turned it into something else than the Bohemian.
Yeah, now it's all rich people and shakers and movers, literally.
I see it. Probably the first one they let in is sort of like opening the dike, too. This sounds like a nice thing to be in. We look like we're... we look like we're artists and writers, and it gives us some legitimacy.
Yeah, well, G. William Domhoff, who's a professor up here at UCSC, has written a book, first
on the Bohemian
part of it on the Bohemian Club, and it's called the Bohemian Grove.
Is that right?
It's very interesting.
Interlocking families. When you talk about the first families, and then their public servants, they bring in...
Yeah, well, the new, the social climbing families try to marry into the old rich and old money. And
that's been going on for centuries.
Since man began, yeah.
That's right. I think that the Indians down in Louisiana, the famous ones, if you were royalty, you could not marry another royalty, you had to marry a commoner. So that eventually they saw, socialistically anyway, or in their society, that they'd all be equal. I remember that because that particular text was on the graduate record exam, and you had to answer all these questions about these crazy Indians not marrying one royalty or another. And this situation of social climbing and that ability to get socially high has come more these days to money than it used to be. It used to be, really, the family name. I didn't care if you were broke, but your family name got you there. It doesn't look like it does it anymore.
Well, in the case of the Rockefeller families, it's very interesting. John D. was smart enough to learn his lesson, although he didn't join the Episcopal Church. Still stayed a Baptist, but, he wasn't going to do everything required. But after that 1911 Supreme Court breakup, then he started his foundations and started giving money around all over the country, so partly to help him join the 400.
A dime to every kid that came to Rockefeller Center.
Silver dime.
Okay. Well, we're going to be back. It's time for another break. Time to pay the bills. This is John Arlen with Mae Brussell and Tom Davis. This is the KMFO Forum, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the KMFO Forum. With me tonight, Mae Brussell, Tom Davis. I'm John Arlen. We're talking about oil companies. I guess we're getting a little disjointed. One of our critics just told me that. But
You're
I'd like
right.
to make it.
You're right.
We probably do get disjointed.
She's right. No, I think we're covering a lot of news, but I think it's kind of an overview of a lot of corruption.
Okay. What we're really trying to show you is that money talks, and not only that, money corrupts, and we have an awful lot of corruption caused by the ability to gather so much funds and control so much of the capital of the nation. I'd like to make an announcement. This is self-serving, everything else. The ex-Capitola rats of the late 60s and early 70s, the SoCal high school class of 1975, is celebrating their 10th anniversary at Coconut Grove tonight. That's interesting. They're coming in three-piece suits and limousines, not the usual garb they had when they were running around Capitola having the police chase them. But we'll get off that one. Congratulations to the class of 75.
They've now become the yuppies, huh?
Yes, well, there's yuppies and yuffies. The yuppie, of course, is the young urban professional, and then there's the yuffie. That's the young urban failure.
Yeah.
And there's probably 80% of the yuffie to 20% yuppie.
Well, more power to them, and many more happy reunions.
I'd say so.
This is the 10th, huh?
Yeah, the 10th, it's nice about your high school reunion. You can look back and say, you wanted to get out so bad, you got me. You wanted to get out there and just get away from all that. When you got out, you found out that you had to work. And work is a four-letter word.
Also, I think...
it ends in K.
Yes.
Education's important, that they go out and get their education. Some are going to run around and waste the time. If they use those 10 years getting education
I see.
then they're home free the next 10 years. I don't know how you feel about that, Tom. I think if they use those 10 years, then the rest is okay.
It's to establish yourself and get yourself in a position where you can grow.
Well, just the discipline of having to get to classes and take the exams and do the work.
That's right. I think that discipline was very, very good for all of us that ever had to do it, and I hope that nobody drops out of school anymore around here, because we certainly need people that think.
Yeah.
And the schools need to teach people how to think.
But they don't.
But even if they don't, you can recognize today some contradictions between even the teachers. There's more challenge with the media. There's more out there. If the teacher isn't telling you, you can pick it up other places.
That's right. Well, the situation of America's gunboat diplomacy, which has been going on, I guess, since we started, actually. We sent a boat up the Panay, up the Wampu River, and it got blown out of the water by the Japanese, and we raised hell about that because they were looking at the Americans and saying, you're taking care of our interests, and we were always taking care of our interests. But the average person in the United States is not at his interest. It was always an oil company or a banana company down in Nicaragua. How many times have we been to Nicaragua in this century?
But the person in this country is made to think that all the policies are in his interest.
Well, on the same guy, just today, he had a program, and we were getting a little disjointed. The only reason I want to raise the point was he said, we talked about the My massacre with Lieutenant Calley, and we didn't say anything about what happened at Hue, where a bunch of intellectuals were killed by the Vietnamese. I don't think that, because we are a racist society, which we are, I don't think that anybody cared about what happened that another North Vietnamese person did. I think they cared a great deal about how an American reacted to the My Lai thing. I think the same thing holds true with the same arguments in Africa. In Africa, for example, we don't really complain about Idi Amin killing all the blacks. And we didn't talk about anything really
or Frank Turple training him to kill the blacks from the CIA.
Okay. But as soon as our kind, Western European, started pulling apartheid and things like that, we got on their case. Now, one good reason for that is we are racist. We care what other white men do.
No, I don't agree with that.
Oh, I do.
I don't think we care at all. I don't think we just suddenly became interested.
I think what I'm saying is not we as a government, we as people.
No, I don't think we.
Oh,
care.
I do. I care a great deal. When a white man, a person that has the same background as I do, Western European, treats a black man as badly as they do in South Africa, I worry more about that than a black man treating another black man badly.
Americans don't worry. I mean, you've been in India, and you see what the British did in Bombay and so on, and the town, the whole government there, and how they doped all of China. Nobody cared. The fact that Chiang Kai-shek became corrupt, they had to get rid of him. The people didn't want him. We would have gone along with him for 100 years. I don't think people
we
care.
Had the same problem in Yugoslavia with a guy named Tito and another guy named Mikhailovich. We didn't know which side to go on. The British wanted Tito, and we wanted Mikhailovich. Tito came out ahead. We've supported governments, for example, in the support of Marcos in the Philippines is an interesting...
And Mr. Pinochet, there's a story in the paper today about Chile doing tortures again. I don't think that the American people in general, but I'm only talking about us, care unless they can see some visible way that it affects them.
That's right.
I don't think they care at all.
Well, then empathy is dead, and that worries me.
Well, that's not all the people, but that's most of the masses of the Americans don't care, and maybe they're smarter than we are, because if you come down to it, what can they do about it? Nothing.
Well, you don't have to recognize governments that say Gene Kirkpatrick said.
But you don't recognize the government. John doesn't. The guy down the next block here doesn't recognize the government. It's some powerful individual who's working for some other powerful individual back in Washington that does the recognizing.
But when we have a national election, if 40% stay home and another 40 vote for Reagan, those that stayed home really say they don't care, because there was a choice of whether to recognize dictatorships or not, or put money into, this week they said they're going to start the assassination teams and make it legal again, the CIA, or funding the Contras who are doing torturing.
But it doesn't matter, Mae, if they stay home and don't vote, because they're never given the choice to vote for anybody who'll make a difference anyway.
Well, do you think if they voted, say, against Reagan, that we would have had the same kind of CIA actions 4 years later we're getting now.
We'd either have the same kind or else some other government agency would do it anyway. So what difference does it make?
We have Jeff on line one. Let's see what he wants to ask us. Jeff, you're on KMFO. Can you hear us? Hello, Jeff. Jeff?
Tom mentioned Tom Bearden a couple of weeks ago. Do you know Tom?
Well, I've...
familiar with him?
I am familiar with him. I am not on a personal basis, no.
He's one of the top physicists here in the United States, and he is on quite frequently down at KABC out of Los Angeles, which we can pick up on Bill Jenkins' program. Have you ever heard of him?
No.
It would be really worthwhile to listen to him and what Tom is talking about, new energy and what the Russians are doing with the control of the weather and so forth.
Well, no, I'm quite familiar. I have quite a few writings of Bearden's. I sell one of his books, which unfortunately is out of print. Hopefully be reprinted next December.
Yeah, he's a top-notch man, and if anyone has an occasion to listen to him on Bill Jenkins is on from 9 until 12 every Saturday night out of KABC, which is 79 on the dial. Anyway, to get back to what we were talking about, the oil cartel and so forth. John?
Yes.
I wrote you a little expose of my basic philosophy, what was going on a few weeks ago. Did you read the whole complete thing on my scenario?
Yes, I did.
I think it's pretty timely on what I said in that and what you people are talking about. In order to have a monopoly, you have to have a system to support a monopoly. Now, the free market system is the least amount of government interference in your life. You can produce anything, you can go ahead and get the capital, you can get the distribution, and you can sell it. Under another philosophy, which is monopolistic, and there are a lot of isms that will support a monopolistic system. One is communism, one is fascism, one is Nazism, but all these have a generic name, which is socialism.
Well, all the names are totalitarianism, in other words, controlled market.
Totalitarianism.
Yeah.
And this is where our leaders and the people behind the leaders are leading us.
Well, could you stand by one? It's about time I take a break and we pay some of the bills. We'll get back to you after these messages. Russell and Tom Davis, and we're discussing big oil. We're actually discussing monopolies of all sorts, but big oil seems to be the largest of them all. And we have a guest on the phone, and let's go back to him. What more would you like to tell us? I understand you're saying that a controlled economy, everything tends to lead to that. All of capitalism tends to lead to monopoly because people are pressing for the least amount of having people be their competitor. What's your idea on that, sir?
You have the old dialectic that Marx was talking and Hegel were talking about. First you have a free market system, and then you move it into a capitalist system, and then you move it into a socialist system for total control. And how you can control the people from having them compete with you is through the bureaucracy. And say if you discover a new energy source, which they have already done this through Nikola Tesla, they can control you in every facet or any means that you want to go ahead and produce this with, whether you want to get the raw materials, the banking, the financing, or the distribution, or the capital to build a plant. They can stop you at any level they want to, and you're totally controlled through the bureaucracy. So, in my opinion, the big boys, they don't want free market, they don't want free enterprise, they want a socialist state, which we are moving into.
Or at least a control state. I don't like the word socialist because a control state may or may not be socially compatible with the people.
Yeah, well, John, the generic name is, all these other isms, whether it's communism or Nazism, fascism, Marxism, Leninism.
National Socialism.
National Socialism, which was the name of Hitler's party, which the first thing they did.
That's what you're getting now, socialism.
Well, I said National Socialism, the first thing he did was outlaw labor unions. So that's, I'm seeing this happening now in this country. Do you agree?
I think we're all agreeing that we're moving from, the free market into another system. And
until National Socialism, that's what I think it is.
National Socialism, right.
Yeah.
And I just finished a book called The Model Constitution, which was written by Rex Tugwell, which I think may know him. He was
yes. He's the man that wanted to do away with the United States Constitution.
Oh, yeah, right.
And he wants to do away with the trial by jury. Warren Burger flew out to Santa Barbara and put that clause in about 15 years ago that when the new Constitution comes, there'd be no trial by jury.
Well, all these laws are being set up for this new Constitution.
That's the national
Okay,
socialism.
now that gets down to something else. We were talking about if you had a constitutional convention, you can throw out the old one and write a new one, can't you?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
One term for the president, 6 years. The Senate would be appointed by former, you'd have like Gerald Ford and the appointed past presidents, and the Senate would be appointed, and you'd only elect the House of Representatives, and their vote wouldn't have any effect.
Now, which is the
For the new Constitution, you got people like Jerry Brown and Jane Fonda and her husband, what's his name?
Adolf Hitler.
Oh, yeah, the little Hitler. Or the little Mussolini,
Well, on the other hand, you have the Hunts and you have the Rockefellers. You put them in the same ilk?
The big people, again, you're talking about, see?
What's that?
These are the monopolists.
Well, the Merchants is an H.L. Hunt family. And
that's right.
Yeah, but here's the trouble here is you're using a kind of a corrupted right-wing definition of socialism, which you hear all the time. The Birch Society is throwing it out, has been for years.
The Birch Society is using communism, and there's no such thing as communism on it.
Well, but your definition of socialism is not the definition of the original Socialist Party or Jack.
Well, sure, it's all been subverted. Owens and Fubop, they all didn't.
Well, but socialism is a buzzword that the right-wingers and the totalitarians love to use.
We're talking about fascism, and then
we're talking about fascism.
It's nothing to do with fascism.
In my opinion, I think you're wrong. But
no, it's not.
History will prove
that can be
right.
your opinion.
Well, I'm not going to get into a diatribe over that because.
Well, but I think you ought to, because you shouldn't be throwing these terms around unless you know what they mean and what the historical background of them is, and which obviously you don't, or you wouldn't use them in those terms. Socialism is
fascism very loosely, also.
If you're talking about Tom Hayden, why don't you talk about John Singlaub?
Fascism is monopoly capitalism.
That's right, and socialism ostensibly is supposed to be, or we'll put Marxism is supposed to be the dictatorship by the proletariat.
Now, in monopoly capitalism, the ruling families, which originally had the money and had the power, still have the money and still have the power. And they put up a guy who's called the stooge, the front man, and under National Socialism, it happened to be Hitler. Now, socialism, what was the...
Marx was a socialist, Lenin was a socialist.
Yeah, but National Socialism...
Oh, now, wait a minute. You consider that there's such a thing as Marxist, Leninist things?
Beg your pardon?
Is there a possibility to have something that's both Marxist and Leninist?
Well, Lenin was using the platform of Marx. But
not very well, for example.
No, I agree with that.
In other words, Marxism is more to me like The Birds by Aristophanes or The Golden City by Voltaire. Well, we're talking about something that's impossible. He said there wasn't going to be any government under Marxism, and certainly this day and age, the most controlled government in the world are those people that are ostensibly Marxist-Leninists. Well, we're going to be back after these messages. This is the KMFO Forum. My name is John Arlen. I had with me up to this point Mae Brussell and Tom Davis, and we're going to talk about another subject as soon as the break is over. We're going to talk about a restaurant that's having a special sale that we really want to inform all our listeners about. And we'll be right back.